something about the recent string of autumn days with bright blue skies. Think about yesterday, not a cloud in the sky. Brought me back to those days surrounding September 11th, 2001. Several weeks following 9/11, I was called upon to conduct the service of interment for the remains of a former New Jersey State Police Lieutenant Colonel and Superintendent of Police and Director of Public Safety for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. At the time, as I was serving in a congregation in Ewing, New Jersey, I became the unofficial chaplain of the state police because the headquarters was in West Trenton. The fellow's name was Fred Maroney. Lieutenant Colonel Maroney died in the September 11th collapse of One World Trade Center. Another agency employee reported encountering Maroney heading upward in a rescue effort as people were fleeing downward from offices on the 66th and 67th floors. At the time, in thinking about the kind of remarks I would make at Lieutenant Colonel Maroney's interment service, I had reflected deeply on the meaning of duty. Of course, this sense of duty is not limited to military, police, fire, or emergency services. All of us have certain moral obligations and duties that spin off from our daily callings as God's people. There are things we need to do and ought to do. We are expected to perform these duties that come as a matter of course in our daily walks of life. If Lieutenant Colonel Maroney were still with us today, he would have said, "I was just doing my duty. I was just doing my job." Our parable this morning calls us to pay attention to how we view our sense of Christian duty. Why do we do good works? Why do we commit our time, talent, and financial resources for the mission of the church? For what reasons do we serve God and our neighbor? The parable is blunt. We are to see ourselves as slaves, as servants. After laboring in the field and then preparing dinner, we are to think of ourselves as unworthy servants who simply do what we are called on to do. When we hear this language initially, we resist. Raise your hand if you'd like to be called a slave. This is not language we are comfortable with for good reason. This is an antiquated analogy about an unfeeling master and a poor old slave who is not sufficiently acknowledged for his routine work. After all, God, we say, I work awfully hard at it, and that ought to be worth something. I should at least get a pat on the back. But right there is the danger. Works righteousness is sneaky. My wife and I have an ongoing argument at times about who has the worst martyrdom complex. About who is overweight with responsibility at different points in time. Works righteousness is sneaky. We can so easily slide into the notion that the performance of our duty ought to earn brownie points with God and others, I believe the common term circulating around these last several weeks is quid pro quo. Transactional tit for tat. We can so easily substitute duty for faith. This is the source of all misunderstood martyrdom that says no one pats my back, I never get recognized for squat, no good deed ever goes unpunished. Life becomes terribly impoverished for us, though, when we reach the point where God owes us big for some dramatic, beautiful activity of our own will. And many times we make it a lot more dramatic than it really is. The church father Irenaeus once wrote that the glory of God is humanity fully alive. As the introduction to the communion liturgy's proper preface proclaims, and you probably miss it most Sundays, it goes like this: it is indeed right, our duty and our joy, to be God's people in the world. Our task, as always, is to remain faithful to the identity God first gives us in holy baptism. We belong to God. That's it. We never grow beyond the fact that we are God's children and God's servants. We serve no harsh master. We are to live securely in the knowledge that we are forever assured of the Master's love and care. Faith and the obedient life are always bound to God and God's saving activity in Jesus for and through us. All genuine service is done out of gratitude, not with the aim to earn. Only as we discover ourselves as bound to the living God and as dutiful servants of all do we discover ourselves as truly free people. Only as we discover that God's grace is sufficient can we be truly emancipated to perform our duties and delights with expectation of no acclamation and no merit, no quid pro quo. So then, how do we understand and view our duties as Christ's servants? Faith, as a matter of deep trust and confidence, is the freeing power of God's love for us and through us that creates a posture of joy in all the daily duties and small sacrifices. As Mother Teresa often used to say, we are not called to do great things. We're called to do the little things with great love. When you have fed the hungry, say, we have done only what we ought to have done. When you have taught Sunday school for 5 years straight, 1 year more than you wanted to, say, I have done only what I ought to have done. When you discern over the next several weeks how to grow in generosity to support the whole work of the church, say, where do I go from here with my giving? How do I give until I truly notice it? When you work all day, wash the dishes, take out the trash, pay the bills, and then tuck the kids into bed, say, I have done just what God called me to do. Such a life in response to God's amazing grace may not always be flashy, neat, filled with warm fuzzies, or as dramatic as rescuing people from a burning building. But such a life is a life worth living, full of faith toward God, full of burning love for the neighbor, and full of delight through the daily paths of service.